Okay, the first theory is that it was voter fraud.
Oh, yeah.
AKA cooping. I mentioned he was found outside or maybe in a polling station, and apparently it was pretty common at the time for people to find a mark, like Poe, for instance, beat him, kidnap him, dress him in a variety of different disguises, and force him to vote for the same candidate multiple times. It would explain why he was wearing someone else's clothes.
It would explain why he was incoherent.
It would explain why he was incoherent.
Because they would drug him.
It wouldn't explain, why he kept getting worse after he was hospitalized.
Definitely not.
I feel like that's the sort of thing people recover from and can remember what happened.
I don't agree with that.
The other thing, of course, is that and our records are shoddy, but there's no mention of him looking like he got beat up.
Yeah, I know there are other beating theories out there too.
Yeah, and I haven't heard anything, I haven't read anything that says that he was described as having even really any kind of cuts or bruises or anything.
Well, exactly.
No,
that's one thing the doctor probably would have mentioned is if he had two black eyes.
At the very least,
and some missing
bruising.
teeth.
Yeah.
But there is recordings of the fact that there are people who, when they were victims of these cooping schemes, and they would be locked away and they would be drugged, and there are accounts of people who were overdosed with whatever it was, and of course when you voted they gave you a drink, and then you were hauled to the next place and you voted again and you got another drink. So it might be, because Lord knows what kind of concoction they're using to make you docile, that can have a negative effect, that it did kill some people. It was infrequent. But the other problem with this theory is the police who monitored the polling stations that year said it was a very calm and dull day. The coopings, these guys came out in kind of big groups, and it was pretty obvious when they were showing up, because these people were in a cart. They had them all chucked in the back of a cart. So
and there's another problem with this particular theory, which is that Edgar Allan Poe was actually fairly well known back in those days.
Though the description of him is that he looked so unlike himself that even his friends had a hard time recognizing him when they saw him. Somebody who knew him recognized him finally at the bar and said, "Oh, hey, you're not just some random drunk, you're Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, you don't look great. Let's get you some help." But it took a while. So for all we know, it could have been that he just wasn't recognized.
Yeah, it's possible, but
I don't like this theory. I'm not trying to defend it.
I don't think this theory is really any good, but because it sounds like when they discovered him, the election took place on a single day, correct?
Yes.
Right. It sounds like from the state that he was in, he had been going downhill sharply for more than just a day, from the condition of his hair and his skin, his clothes, everything like that.
But these cooping schemes would start to gather people days prior to an election, and they would hold them in basements and locked up and all of that. So I'm not in bed with this theory at all, but it does the evidence does show that if he was a victim of it, he could have been held for days on end.
Why didn't they just bribe him like they do today?
I don't know.
Next up is booze.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Woohoo! Woohoo! As previously mentioned, there were a lot of reports about this. Apparently, Poe was the lightweight. We kind of talked about that. And the validity of that. Who knows? The theory goes that his illness prior to traveling was brought on by drinking. Somebody had tempted him.
Somebody tempted him to fall off the wagon?
And that's what, the doctor was talking about, Dr. Carter was talking about when he said if you have another attack, it'll kill you. There's some speculation that Poe had something that made it so that his body wouldn't process alcohol the right way, or that it affected him a certain way. His sister was also a lightweight, as I mentioned. There's some speculation that could have been caused by a lesion on the brain. I think there are probably other things that can cause that, right?
Yeah. Because I do not like the theory that Poe drank himself to death just because, as Joe pointed out and you pointed out, there's not a whole lot of evidence that he was an alcoholic.
Right.
Because people who love the sauce always drink the sauce. So that doesn't hold up to me. But I just to play devil's advocate, I started looking into, well, how does your body deal with alcohol? And your liver takes and processes somewhere between 90 to 95% of all alcohol that you drink or that you absorb, and then breaks it down from there. And that process, how it does it is the liver first breaks alcohol into acetaldehyde. That's how you say it. I'm struggling with that word for a day now. Which turns out is a pretty bad substance, but once the body doesn't just leave it there, it then breaks it down into acetate, which is relatively inert in the body, and then it can expel it, so the whole thing is normally not a problem.
Right.
But it got me thinking about, what if he has some kind of condition, and there are conditions where people can't handle liquor, and so it has a greater effect on him. If his body wasn't processing alcohol like it should have, or breaking down these components and expelling them the way that it was supposed to, that might account for some of it, because the acetaldehyde, it turns out, is a carcinogen.
Yeah.
And this is something that you find in a chemical form, because we know how to now make that. If people get exposed to the right parts per million of it, they have delirium, they have hallucinations, loss of intelligence, all this stuff. It's actually been linked to, for people who don't break it down correctly, they don't have the proper enzyme, or they don't create enough of the enzyme. It's linked to Alzheimer's. So there is a possibility that his liver specifically, wasn't doing its job in the way that it should have for whatever reason. So he had a buildup of this stuff in his system, which may have caused this condition that the doctor was saying, if this happens to you one more time, it's going to kill you. And I don't know that he necessarily did take a drink. But if he did, and he had built up enough of that in his system, that might have been what he was suffering from. Because if you get enough of this chemical compound, it will kill you. Again, I'm just looking at this from the science perspective. I just wanted to see what happens and how that works, and it's plausible. I don't buy it, but it's totally plausible.
Well, now the thing is, though, is that you have this when you drink alcohol, and the stuff builds up, and you get all horribly sick and everything, then after you recover from that, then I assume your liver does manage to process it at least, and your body manages to get rid of it at least somewhat, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's part of what makes a hangover, is your body is breaking down the alcohol into the acetaldehyde and then into acetate, and that's a noxious thing in your system, so that's part of what makes you sick.
Yeah, but you'd think that if somebody suffered from a condition like that, then if they would notice that every time they drink they get horribly sick, they would not drink. Well,
that might be why Poe, though he did drink occasionally, didn't drink often.
Yeah.
Because it may have been, man, I went out and I had 2 glasses of wine and I had a really fun time, and I have felt like crap for 3 days. That could explain why he was such an infrequent drinker, and why he got on board with the temperance movement. That's my other issue with the boozed himself to death. Okay, he had friends that were in the movement, so he jumped on board the bandwagon. But they're just, the evidence doesn't support it, short of this one jerk who said, "Oh yeah, Poe was a total booze hound."
Yeah.
Well, also I think that even if he had some alcohol, I don't think that I don't think the doctor was feeding him alcohol in the hospital, so he should have recovered.
Well, yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Devin. When they picked him up, there's nothing in the writing that says, "Oh, and by the way, your buddy smells like a still."
No, there's not. And as I said, Moran, for all his unaccountability, did say, no, Poe was not drunk.
He said he did not smell of liquor.
Yeah, he said drunk. He wasn't showing any signs of that. And I think the only thing that this kind of helps to explain is you get drunk and wear someone else's clothes. Like, I mean, that's...
We've all done it.
I know.
Yeah, we've all done it. No, we haven't? Okay.
Yeah.
Next theory.
Yeah.
Poisoning of any kind. Carbon monoxide, heavy metal poisoning.
Heavy metal, maybe. Carbon monoxide, no. I mean,
there is something, and I don't remember what the compound is, in the medication that he would have been taking for cholera. There is a compound in it that if you get enough of it, it is really lethal. But he would have had to been taking so much of that compound that it's obscene. He would have been having to take, I don't remember what it was, 5 to 10 times the prescription for that to have made him go into the state that he was found in.
Right.
Yeah, back in those days, they put some pretty questionable stuff in some of the, like mercury.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I think that might be what was in it, was mercury.
Yeah, I think, and so maybe he did chug a lot of his bottle of laudanum, I don't know. But
the other thing is that, so Poe's hair became a collector's item directly after his death.
Which is actually kind of fortunate.
Yeah, it turns out it's
and
fortunate
creepy.
Because doctors have been able to, since then, take and test his hair, and they've come up with nothing.
There's nothing in it that they can find.
There's nothing they can find. So no, and no.
And
rabies?
no.
I'm actually kind of liking rabies.
You like rabies?
I'm thinking rabies makes a lot of sense.
I've never liked rabies.
Never liked it?
As a disease, I really don't like it
I don't
at
really
all.
care for it either.
Yeah, that's why, when people come up to say, we're raising money for cancer, I say, go to hell. I'm not in favor of cancer.
Apparently his symptoms match. I don't buy it. How he would have gotten it is unclear. There was no evidence to suggest that he gotten bit by anything. One of the biggest, most prevalent, almost every single time somebody has rabies, symptoms is the fear of water, and he did not have that. So,
yeah, that's the only problem with that. Is there are probably other ways to get rabies besides just being bitten by a dog, or
a bat,
or a rat,
yeah.
But rabies isn't an immediate onset. Rabies has an incubation period of something on the order of, if I remember correctly, 4 to 6 weeks before you're really in the symptoms.
Yeah, so he could have gotten a rat bite, for example, and it had enough time to heal.
Exactly.
And, yeah. So
while again, not on board with it, I'm not going to discount it because there was no bite wound.
Yeah, it's the water thing for me.
But I don't. Actually, I was going to check into the actual symptoms of hydrophobia, because I know that hydrophobia, you're afraid of water, and I know Poe drank water while he was in the hospital. But I don't know if hydrophobia means that you're afraid of the water, because you still have to drink water to stay alive, right?
But that's part of the problem with rabies, is that you're afraid of water, and so you don't drink, and so you start to get dehydrated. So, people won't drink. That's why they get all their fluids intravenously when they're being treated for rabies, when they're in the throes of it. Because you can't say, would you like a glass of water? Because they freak out and knock it out of your hand, and it scares the holy living crap out of them.
Okay.
But again, I don't buy that one.
Yeah, I don't like it either. Next is an illness of some kind. It's not a tumor addition.
Nice.
It's speculated he could have had the flu or had another bout of cholera. There's nothing to suggest the symptoms. It's not, he wasn't throwing up. He wasn't pooping. He could have been hypoglycemic.
Which I don't get, because I assume they were feeding him. So if he had low blood sugar, you would think.
Yep.
That
he could have had some unknown illness.
Like the vapors?
Like, I don't know what.
Yeah.
He could have
the
had...
vapors?
The vapors? The vapors is just a term for when Victorian women would be all offended, and they'd act all faint, and go, oh my lord, sir, and they'd go sit on the fainting couch, because they're, that's the vapors, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Devin. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just didn't get that.
Could have had syphilis. I mean, he could have.
Coulda.
Does
lead to insanity at the end. So it's entirely possible. It seems like it came on really quickly.
It seems like he would have been showing symptoms, although if he had been sick and not looking well, it does seem like it came on really quickly, though.
If we're gonna say that it's syphilis, because we've gone down this road, I would point. Have either of you ever done any research into Al Capone? Who
No,
had
but
syphilis?
I know, yeah, he was a syphilitic idiot.
Yeah, but that lasted a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as if, yeah, I've got syphilis. Oh, I'm not treating. Yeah, I got syphilis, and woo, screwy, dead 3 days later.
No, it doesn't work that way.
No, you drag on for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, it
So-
eats holes in your brain. So
Exactly. It's not an immediate killer.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm not liking syphilis.
I don't
good.
either.
I don't like
In
syphilis.
fact, I don't like syphilis, period. Yeah.
Yeah, really, why would you?
Nobody should.
He could have, I guess, been epileptic as well. Hard to
no.
tell.
Explain that to me.
I can't explain it. It's just something I saw on the internet.
Okay.
No, I saw that too on the internet too, and I was kind of
Yeah.
scratching my head over that one.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, we're kind of doing a list of things that aren't viable right now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Just to say it.
I feel so much better now.
Great.
Yeah,
knowing
but-
that's what this list is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what that list is.
My mother had epilepsy, and she also had brain cancer, and eventually after the surgery and all the radiation and everything that they gave her, she had a massive seizure, and she was out of her mind for several days. I mean, literally. I mean, it was crazy. But she wasn't completely incoherent. I could still talk to her, but she wasn't perceiving reality quite correctly. I mean, like for example, I was talking to her, and she said the people around here they're acting so strangely, because like the phone rings, and I tell them to answer the phone, and they say the phone's not ringing, and I'm going like, they're lying to me. And then I was visiting her. Next time I was visiting her, we're sitting there talking, and suddenly she says, "There, do you hear it?" And she's pointing at the phone, and the phone was not ringing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and stuff like that. I mean, I can list a whole bunch of stuff, but she eventually recovered, though. She didn't just like go down and down and down and then die.
Right.
Because of the epileptic seizure.
Yeah, she was kind of sort of out of her mind for a few days, and then it started getting better, and within 3 or 4 days, she was okay again. You know, so
Yeah.
So
No,
much-
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now it's illness of some kind. It's a tumor.
Oh, this is the tumor edition?
This is actually not a bad one.
This is the one that I'll get behind.
These next two
Yeah.
are my two favorite. I've saved the best for last. Apparently, a doctor once told Poe in his younger years, I think it was a doctor in New York, and he was in his 20s or something like that, said that he had a lesion on his brain, and that was the root of his booze problem.
How did they figure that out?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I'm just asking.
An X-ray, maybe? I don't know what you can see and what you can't see anywhere.
Yeah.
If you have like scar tissue that's different, I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't know how they
Yeah.
figure out you have a lesion on the brain
I don't know either.
in 1830.
Yeah, I
so
don't
I'm just asking.
I have no idea. Yeah.
Because here's the thing, I'm kind of pulling a Devin on Devin, is I'm Googling as we're talking, and I knew I'd heard something about this recently, which is X-rays weren't used clinically until about 1896.
Oh.
So if he's in his
Boo.
20s, it's 1829, 1830-ish, 1840-ish. It's still not something that they're doing. So I just
Okay, so
I don't
know how that doctor knew, but let's just like take on faith that the doctor knew or said, "Hey, there's something wrong with your brain."
Yeah,
He was a
there's-
brain savant of some kind.
Maybe.
There are ways to deduce disorders and stuff like that from the behaviors. Sometimes you can tell, but of course, back in those days, a lot of it
harder.
was like basically they were
Right.
kind of witch doctors.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if they were still bleeding people in this
No.
at that time, were they?
I don't
Oh,
think
I'm sure
so.
some of it happened, but not nearly as much as it had
I know
historically.
it wasn't that much that earlier. Like George Washington, for example, supposedly died of a cold that turned into pneumonia, but he probably actually died because they kept bleeding him.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise he would have lived a lot longer.
Yeah.
and that was not that long before. I mean,
No.
Yeah.
No,
That was
no.
a few- that was
The
a few
practice was
decades.
still around, but I
Yeah.
don't think it was quite as popular as it had once been.
Can we start talking about my favorite theory again?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, we've we went
Great.
way out in the weeds, didn't we?
Yeah, we haven't discussed yet that Poe's body was fairly unceremoniously dumped into a cheap coffin into an unmarked grave when he first died.
Well, it wasn't quite dumped. They placed it in there, and he actually had a very brief funeral. I think it lasted 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It
with
did.
7 people in attendance.
Yeah, poor guy.
Yeah.
At least, there's so many millions of people who love him now.
Well, and that's exactly it. 26 years later, his body was exhumed and moved to a more permanent location with this like huge statue, or not statue, but